Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Tuesday topic. Today is a PhD student skills development workshop, funding your dissertation. We've got Clare Milner and looks like about 8 other people here on the line. I think we've got a few more folks that might be joining us momentarily. So if we can just maybe hold off for just another minute, and then we can start with the show.
Oh, sounds good.
Can everybody hear okay? Great. Okay. Great. Claire, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Darren. Let me share my screen here and get started. Okay, so I just want to start by introducing myself to those of you who don't know me. My name is Clare Milner. I'm an associate professor in physical therapy and rehabilitation sciences department. And I'm also the director of the PhD program in rehabilitation sciences. So as you know, today we're going to talk about the topic of funding your dissertation and talk about that from the perspective of why that's something that you should consider, what some of the sources could be, and some things specific to how you go about that process within Drexel. So in a very, I also meant to say, and I forgot to mention it, if you have any questions about any of the things that I'm talking about as we go along, please use the raise hand function, which you can find under participants in the menu bar. And when you raise your hand, Joe, who's in the meeting, will call on you to ask your question. And please feel free to stop me and ask questions along the way if anything comes to mind. So overall, the idea of dissertation funding, as you might expect, is to provide support for your dissertation research. And that could be support in a couple different ways. That could be support for you and your time, particularly once you get to the data collection stage and also the writing stage before your dissertation defense. It may also include support for things that you need or would like to have for your actual dissertation project work. And it may include support for things like maybe a travel to a conference, maybe some support for your participants to attend data collection sessions. So it kind of runs the gamut. And that's really dependent on the specifics of the particular grant or fellowship that you're applying for. I would say kind of at the lower end of the scale in up to a few $1,000s, often they don't provide any support for you personally in terms of paying for your time or providing any kind of living expenses. There are some options with greater amounts of funds that may have fewer restrictions and allow you to also support yourself as well as your work. Being dissertation research, it's quite specific, typically about a year in duration, so that it's focused on that stage of your studies. So you may be thinking, well, okay, you know, I know what I'm planning to do for my dissertation. I'm going to be the one doing the work, recruiting participants, running the data collections, processing the data. Why would I need funding? So there are a few reasons why we definitely recommend that everyone at least give some consideration to applying for dissertation funding. A big one is that you get experience writing a grant. Now, you all take classes in scholarly writing and so on, and that gives you a bit of a flavor. But actually applying for some external funding to an external body where they have their particular rules and regulations to follow and their requirements and page limits and all of these different sections that they require, it gives you that hands-on experience of being responsible for that process yourself as part of your PhD training, which I think is an invaluable experience to go through. If you're lucky enough to receive the grant, then you also get some experience in being responsible for managing a budget. So when you submit the grant, you will have laid out in a fair amount of detail how you're going to spend the money. And then you're sort of held to that to a greater or lesser degree when you receive the funds. And then that will get monitored by the Office of Research, as well as you may have to provide interim or maybe a final report to the source of your funding as well. In terms of the PhD being training for your next stage in your career, so whether you're looking to step into a postdoc, move into a position as a research scientist, look for a position in academia, continue in clinical work, and also become a clinician scientist and continue to do research there. One big piece of the PhD training program is to start to shape your CV so that it looks like the CV of a junior colleague to the people that will be interviewing you for some of those positions. So in that sense, having at least submitted or ideally received a grant during your PhD studies really starts to help you stand out as a researcher whose work is important and interesting enough that external bodies are interested in supporting it. So this helps to start to build up the picture in your CV as that new research colleague. It's also true that once you get, I hear it's also true that once you get funding, you tend to increase your chance for obtaining subsequent funding. A large part of the reason for that is if you receive funding, you complete the study, you publish papers, present at conferences on the work supported by that study, you start to build a picture of yourself as someone who is able to complete work, able to complete all the steps of the research process, able to manage grant budgets. And so each successful grant is a demonstration of your skill in that aspect of the whole research skills that you're developing. And so funding agencies are always looking to try to support work, as well as, of course, it being reviewed in the importance and innovation in terms of the proposal itself, but they're also looking to try to be able to support researchers who they believe have a strong chance of completing the work and of them benefiting from the results that are obtained for this proposal that they're supporting. So this is how that cycle of receiving grants, small grants, building up to larger and larger grants helps to support you through continuing to be successful in that process. On the practical side of things, in terms of recruiting participants for a study, it's often easier to recruit participants if you're able to offer them some small compensation for the time that they're volunteering for research. So there's no hard and fast rules about this, but for a study that's not particularly invasive or time consuming or doesn't have a lot of repeated visits, say a 2-hour visit to your site to participate in data collection, a typical amount might pay participants maybe around $50, usually in the form of often in the form of a gift card, sometimes in the form of cash, sometimes in the form of, things which they might like to have, especially if you're working with a younger population. They might be interested in things other than just cash money. So that can help to improve your recruitment rate. We all know the dissertation is under a time crunch, and we want to be able to recruit participants in a timely way. So being able to offer that honorarium, that small amount of compensation for their time, can help that recruitment move along a little faster. Similarly, if you are looking to be able to have people other than you do some parts of, whether it's the data collection, whether it's transcribing audio, following data collections, these types of activities can be supported by the dissertation funding. Maybe you need some new small pieces of equipment. Maybe you need an audio recorder to record some interviews, and so that can be written into the grant proposal so that you can have your own equipment always available to you for your planned data collections. So those are the possibilities, the reasons why applying for dissertation funding is a benefit in addition to just those kind of that monetary aspect. What are the amounts that you could expect? Well, it's pretty much all across the board. Could be starting at around $1,000 from a foundation, or maybe that's a grant specifically aimed at student research. If you apply for government funding, it may be in the tens of thousands of dollars. Hopefully you saw Dr. Clegg's NIH Grant Tuesday topic last month, where she was talking about the F mechanism, which students are able to apply for to the NIH. So the sums involved are quite substantial, and kind of reflective of that, the level of competition for those funds is also quite substantial. So not to say that that wouldn't be a reason to apply, but that's one avenue for source of funding. Maybe more commonly, these other sources where we can gain some smaller amounts of funding, but that can make a real difference to your project, sort of from this $1,000 to $5,000 or maybe up to $10,000 range. So one source could be your professional associations. They typically have some restrictions, like you need to be a member, and in some cases you may need to have some particular criteria to become eligible for membership. You may have to agree to present your work the following year at their conference, and that you may be expected to support that travel to the conference under your own costs. It may not be part of the grant budget. But these are one of the kind of broad areas, and I'll come back to in terms of where to look for support specifically for dissertation grants. So I asked around in rehabilitation sciences for some examples of previous funding that some of our students have received for their dissertation work. So in rehabilitation sciences, one of our pathways is applied biomechanics. And so the American Society of Biomechanics has a dissertation grant called a Student Grant in Aid. And that's for 1 year, and it's for a sum of $2,000. I know that one has a restriction of you're not allowed to pay yourself, but that can be for those other costs, small equipment, honorary or parking fees for participants, that kind of thing. Several of our PhD students are physical therapists. And so the American Physical Therapy Association has several different mechanisms depending on the specialty area. And as you can see, has different amounts of funding that may be available that our previous students have successfully received to support their dissertation work. So this may parallel to professional associations in your area that may also have grants available specifically for students and maybe specifically for the dissertation. I have some examples here from Dr. Bratt from Creative Arts Therapies. So again, we're looking at that kind of consistent amount somewhere in between $1,000 to up to about $5,000, and then there's some national foundations that have these larger sums available. So I did just want to take a minute and check in with those of you who are in different departments, maybe nutrition and nursing, I think students are here. Do you know of any grants available through your professional associations that you're members of that you can mention and share with the group? And I'll add to my list for my slides here.
Hi, Dr. Milner, it's Lisa. I believe, I have to double check, but there is a National Institute of Nursing Research, and they do offer a wide variety of scholarship type of offerings. I myself am a member of the Gerontological Society of America, and there are oftentimes smaller grants through there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Anyone else familiar with potential sources?
I believe the AANP, the American Association of Nurse Practitioners, I didn't get the chance to apply this year, but I do believe that they do offer grant funding for research. And I'm looking at another one now that I'm in the process of applying to. It's not a professional organization, but it's from the Family Process Institute Grant Awards for early scholarship research and clinical dissertations.
Excellent. Thank you. So, okay, so we've got, oh, go ahead, Bridget. My apologies.
Sorry, the Mid-Atlantic region of the American Music Therapy Association has some research grants, and AMTA might as well, but I don't know the specifics offhand. I know they've changed a little bit in recent years.
Thank you. So as we've seen from these different examples, there are potential sources to go to, generally associated with professional associations and societies, as well as the specific foundations that overlap with your areas of research interest. So in terms of the process, when is the best time to start looking for funding for your dissertation? So in terms of the timeline, at least of a full-time PhD student who hits all of the milestones, at least in our program, that's slated out to be a 3-year process. And then your dissertation, so let's see, you finish classes at the end of 2 years, you propose your dissertation shortly after that, and then you begin the main data collection for your dissertation, write that up and defend it so at the end of year 3. So your dissertation maybe is from the end of year 2 to year 3. Your proposal is about halfway through year 2. So with that kind of timeline, certainly would start to look sooner rather than later. And I say that because commonly these opportunities only have one submission date per year. So, you know, national institutions like the National Institute of Health, they have multiple submission dates a year. So they have 4 or 3 submission dates a year. But these smaller sources typically have one submission date a year. So it could be a bit tricky as to how that might line up with your planned timeline for your dissertation. So my recommendation there is to apply earlier rather than later. So for example, I know the American College of Sports Medicine has a doctoral student grant, and the deadline is around mid-January. So in terms of a typical timeline for a proposal and dissertation, it doesn't line up ideally. So perhaps, let's see, student takes, in our program, takes candidacy exams around March, and then maybe take the rest of the year to get ready for the dissertation proposal. So you have to kind of parse it out. So the deadline is in January, and then the notification isn't until April. And so if you were to win the award, you wouldn't have access to the funds until April. So if the timeline fell such that you would have completed your data collection before then it wouldn't be particularly helpful to have funds rolling in at the end of, towards the end of the process. So that often means that you have to apply maybe a little sooner than you're sort of ready for, because you haven't necessarily completed your proposal yet. But I would say the advantages of applying for funding, including having the extra funds available to facilitate your data collection and so on for your dissertation, I would say those advantages outweigh any kind of difficulties in the timing being a little bit off in terms of you writing that proposal sooner than your main dissertation proposal. I would say to go for that early side rather than miss the opportunity. And so the sooner that you can start to become aware of the options you may have available to you, and then try to kind of synchronize those deadlines and figure out how that all lines up against your own planned dissertation timeline, that will help you to find the best funding cycle to make your submission in. So in terms of how to do this as a Drexel student, there are a lot of things to keep in mind to follow the process, appropriately. And really, it's true to say that even though these applications are for smaller sums of money, they go through all of the same steps as, you know, a large $1 million NIH R01. The internal process to follow is essentially just the same. So some particular things to think about before you get ready to submit your application. If that timing falls such that you will be submitting the grant proposal before your proposal defense, so meaning that before your committee has actually agreed on your planned dissertation and all of its details, then your committee needs to be kept in that loop in terms of, here's what I'm submitting to the grant. This is what I'm also planning to do for my dissertation. My proposal will be coming in a few months when you'll get all of the details. But at this stage, are you comfortable with the specific aims I have listed in this grant proposal? Otherwise, you could run into a sticky situation later on if your committee wasn't familiar with the grant proposal you submitted and got funded, and turns out that they're not supporting that exact direction for your dissertation. Your dissertation may change direction a little bit based on feedback from your committee and your proposal defense, and now you could end up with a bit of a mismatch between your study, your planned study, and your approved dissertation study. So I would say that in that case, definitely I would go back to the agency you received that funding from, give them an update, and then request for them to allow those funds to be used to support the new, you know, modified project direction. And then of course they have the opportunity to allow that or to say that, you know, that doesn't meet what they supported. But prior preparation helps to prevent these kinds of wrinkles. The rules as to what you're allowed to do and who you're allowed to contact, to talk about your ideas with, differ by foundation or by funding agency or by professional associations rules. And in terms of being a student at Drexel, everything has to go through our, I guess you say, formal channels. So for foundations specifically, that means via the Office of Institutional Advancement. And that Office of Institutional Advancement should be contacted in the first instance by your advisor, kind of on your behalf, to set that up initially, and then proceed that way. So with all of these external funding applications, we and you are all representatives of Drexel and are all promising things in the proposal, that things that will be done at Drexel. And so that means that everything that's written in those proposals and talked about and moved forwards has to be approved by Drexel administration so that they can sign off and say, yes, we agree that this type of work in this particular project will be done by Drexel and at Drexel. Similarly, in the college, there's the first layer of submission is at the college before it goes out to the main university. So there's a procedure to follow in the college in terms of completing a form with some basic information about the grant that you're applying for and the deadlines and so on, and who's involved. That's submitted to the college's research office. Then they will meet with you and your advisor. They will lay out a timeline that they need materials from you for them to be able to meet the sponsor's deadline. And that timeline is probably going to be way sooner than what you thought it would be. So definitely a good idea to have that meeting as early as possible. And so the submissions will be made electronically to the college Office of Research, and then they'll process it and they forward it on to the Drexel Administration College of Research. And then they process that and give the final approval and say that the submission could go ahead. And kind of related to that, on all of that internal material, students are not allowed to be PIs for grants at Drexel. And so your advisor will be listed as the PI, but that's just for Drexel's processing. you'll still be the PI in terms of the application itself. But there are a lot of, I guess, administrative steps related to the grant submission that add a lot of time kind of in the preparation phase that you might not kind of have expected to have to allow for. It's more than just, you draft your application, your advisor says it looks good and you submit it, but the university, the college and the university is involved from that process, start to finish. Has anyone who's here gone through this process at Drexel and submitted a grant so far?
I just have, as a research coordinator with emergency medicine, I've done it for some of the docs.
And so what was your experience in terms of the timeline and so on?
I don't know how things are now over in that office, but you, just like anything else, you have to keep up on them. There's a lot of legal language that goes back and forth just to make sure everybody's covered.
Right. So is it fair to say, my characterization, that it probably takes more time than you might expect?
Yeah, I was laughing. I was on mute, but I was laughing when you said that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so just be aware of these additional steps that your process will go through to be ready for submission. So I did talk about the timeline a little bit already in terms of how to best get the probably once a year submission to line up with when it would be best for you to have funds available to start spending to support your dissertation research. And so earlier is better. You can hold on to them for a few months and then start your data collections after your dissertation proposal is approved. In terms of that timeline and the college's Office of Research, I would say their recommendation they put out to us is that we should be getting in contact with them at least 3 months before the submission deadline. So say for that January deadline, we should start talking to them in the early fall. And then they really do give a very detailed list of exactly what they will need and when they will need it. So certainly they provide that strong guidance, but those lead times are really, really pretty long. So in terms of some specific sources, I say Dr. Clegg had spoken about F&K awards a couple weeks ago. There is another NIH mechanism specific for dissertations, which is the R36. And I put a couple examples up here of the different institutes or sources that might be funding those. So that's certainly an option to take a look at. And particularly if you can have the lead time for that. The NIH proposals are pretty involved. The proposal document itself is quite long, and then there are lots of additional documentation to go along with that. The foundations and associations tend to have a much smaller overall submission packet for them to review for proposals. If you'd like to go and search for other sources of government funding, then that's all corralled under grants.gov, and you can look for all types of funding there, different keywords, specific agencies, try to narrow that down, see what your options might be. Some other examples, the VA, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Council on Aging. So these are all government funding, so available nationally. And kind of the pros and cons, larger amounts of funding available versus potentially higher levels of competition and greater numbers of submission that you're competing against.
Dr. Milner, are governmental fundings available for international students?
So it's a good question, and I am going to be able to specify that for some of the other sources I'm going to talk about in a couple slides. But for government funds, well, the short answer is it depends, right? So it's not it's not kind of an across the board no, but some of the mechanisms have stipulations such as a student or an applicant must be a permanent resident, so green card holder. Not necessarily in all cases, so it's kind of to check on a case-by-case basis, because in some instances the NIH does fund international work that's actually not conducted in the US. So it's pretty common. I've seen that stipulation of permanent resident fairly often, but I would say take a look on a case-by-case basis for the government sources. As for, well, I'll talk more about professional associations when I come on to that slide. And similarly for foundations, all of the choices they make about who they want to fund is, you know, entirely their description of who that might be. So it's really a case of kind of have to check that and see. But in terms of foundations, there are online databases, and I believe we have a subscription through the Office of Research to be able to search for these opportunities. And then just kind of a note to note that they pretty much routinely will say that they don't fund individuals, but what that really means is they don't hand the check over to a single person. They always want to hand the funding over to an institution, so that it's administered by the institution as part of the administration of the funds and of the grant. So while you would be the PI, and so considered the primary investigator, you are considered to be doing that under the auspices of Drexel University. So that would not exclude you at all, because the funding always goes to the institution. So here are some examples of foundations. And as you can see, even the title of some of these is suggesting some kind of focusing on particular areas. And so the best way to check out what's available for these is to just pull them up online. Foundations don't necessarily always repeat the same funding cycle exactly. Some of them may be every 2 years. They may open a particular mechanism and run it for a few years and then just close it out, and a different mechanism may open up. So it's pretty fluid. And so it's good, I think, to become familiar with potential sources, and then, you know, periodically, every now and again, to check back and see if they have opportunities that are open. As I mentioned earlier, foundation funds are typically administered through the Office of Institutional Advancement. Although in some cases, foundations which are really geared towards research specifically, as opposed to some foundations have a broad portfolio of philanthropy and supporting different types of community projects as well as research projects. The ones which are more research-based may be handled through the Office of Research. And so as you contact OIA in the Office of Research with your advisor, they'll direct you to whoever's going to manage that process for the internal Drexel processor. Foundations and funding agencies also have their own particular rules about how you're able to interact with them. So in some cases, you may have a point of contact that you can email to ask for a call, and then talk to them about your idea, and they can give you feedback on if that sounds like the kind of project that they are interested in funding, and then they may encourage you to submit, or they may say, actually, you know, that doesn't quite line up with the direction we're going, here's where we're going, and then you'll have this additional information. In some cases, there's not allowed to be any of that type of contact at all, and if you were to make that contact, it would disqualify you from the opportunity. So again, you know, it's hard to make any, you know, specific recommendations because it's so individualized. So really, I would say just take a close look at the posting, and then if you do have the opportunity to contact one, if there's a contact person there, definitely it's an opportunity to take advantage of, because you just might get a little bit of guidance that can help you to tailor your application slightly different. Could be same project presented slightly differently in a way that makes it sound more attractive to them, and that will be a benefit for you. So whenever there's an opportunity to talk with a contact, so for the NIH and so on, that would be a program officer. But for foundations, if there's a contact person, then certainly take advantage of that opportunity. Anything that can help you to be able to pitch your proposal the way that, so to give it the most appeal to the potential funding sponsor is definitely something to take advantage of. A large part of successful grantsmanship is being able to, you could take the same project, but there are many ways that you could present it, and being able to present that in a way that really speaks to the people who are going to be reviewing that and considering it for funding. Whatever you can do to help you get that pitch right definitely is something to take advantage of, and to really work on that selling of your proposal. More than just, we all have good ideas and we can present those ideas, but we really need to be able to tell these people who are not involved with our project at all why they should also get excited about it. And so if you're allowed to make contacts and potentially get some guidance there, definitely that's something to take advantage of. So kind of in following on from that, in terms of their guidelines, if their focus is more about the clinical, is more on the clinical side and service delivery, as opposed to basic research and learning new knowledge, those two different areas of focus would lead you to write the same project with different emphasis to have greater appeal in one direction or the other. So it doesn't necessarily change the project itself, but it's really about how you construct your application to literally, if the instructions mention, 5 different aspects of what they're looking for, if you have a way that you could describe your project as meeting those, make sure to include every single one so that they are seeing the benefits of your project for their portfolio of research interests. And at foundations, more so than traditional granting agencies, the people reviewing your research may not be other scientists. And so our tendency to use jargon and assume familiarity with terms that we would talk about with our colleagues and peers, that may not be the appropriate language to use to write your funding proposal. Really, I guess the overall message here is to tailor what you have and package it up in a way that the people that are going to review that can also share in your enthusiasm and can also see how this would really benefit the area that they are supporting with their funds. Okay, I have a few examples here of professional associations and the types of funding that they're supporting. So they're all abbreviations, sorry about that. So the American College of Sports Medicine, and actually I did check, and they do not have restrictions on the nationality of doctoral students. I'm familiar with ACSM, so I know this one. Their grants are for any full-time student in a PhD program. So and I think I would say in general, professional associations, maybe foundations, maybe are less likely to have that restriction, but again, on a case-by-case basis. I also am familiar with the American Society of Biomechanics, and same thing, they're just looking for a PhD student registered at an institution. So these could be some sources. These other, American Physical Therapy Association, Music Therapy Association, Dance Therapy, and Art Therapy. So I think it's a pretty common theme that our professional associations recognize their role in helping students to be successful and become the professionals of the future. And so it's very common that these types of associations do have some sort of award to support student research, and especially to support PhD student research. So most of these, so ACSM's $5,000, ASB's $2,000, some of these others in the range of $1,000. So $1,000 to $5,000 is kind of that typical amount to work with here. And then whichever specifications they put on how you can spend that budget. I do want to make sure everyone is aware of the support that is available for doctoral students here at Drexel, and these are related to presenting your work at professional meetings. So you can find them on Graduate College website, but I wanted to take the time to point them out here because I noticed even in my department, so this is my remiss because I'm the program director, our students weren't necessarily all aware of these two opportunities that you have every year that you're in the program. So these are not restricted to dissertation research. These are for any time that you are the presenting author for a poster or a slide presentation at a professional conference. You're allowed to apply to each of these two mechanisms once every year. And so you can see the first one is domestic, so for travel anywhere nationally. And these are the maximum amounts. In the experience of our department, students don't necessarily get the maximum amount, but our students have had success at being supported. And so there's an application process, including demonstrating that your abstract's been accepted. And there's also an international award for presentations which are outside of the US. It's a little bit more money. Of course, it's probably a little bit or a lot more expensive whenever we're allowed to travel. But the good news is for each of these, you can apply for both of them within 1 year. That's allowed. If you have abstracts accepted at a national and an international conference, and you can apply for them every year. So there's potential for more than one, to receive these funds more than once during your program here. And this, as I say, it's not related to dissertation work. It's any work that you are the presenting author on that you're eligible to apply for these awards. So I just want to make sure that everyone knew that these were available within Drexel. Other suggestions? Of course, we can always Google it. But one that I would say not to overlook is to ask your advisor and also all of your committee members, specifically if they know of any sources that you might be able to apply for funds. They may be aware of things that you haven't come across because they're in your committee, they're in your field, so they may be able to also open up some access to sources that you were not aware of. Okay, so anyone have any questions? Anything I didn't talk about that you'd like to ask?
I was just wondering, so are we being taxed by for the grants that we get? In my master's, I received a grant that was from NYU, and it was $1,000, but I received $700 because $300 was taxed. I was just wondering, like, if that's the case for every grant or if it's just what happened at that time.
Okay, so typically no, but let me try and make the distinction. So in the case where you receive something that might be called a fellowship or a scholarship, which supports your living costs, like a stipend as part of your studies, that is my understanding that is essentially, wages or salary or funds to you. And so that would be subject to taxation. But in the case of a grant that's specifically to support a research project.
Yeah, that was an award for research project, but.
Okay.
I guess.
So, well, I don't know, because this is, so when it's a research project, as I talked about, everything has to be approved by Drexel because Drexel's the one who receives the money. And so actually, the money's never yours, so you would never be taxed on it. Okay. Drexel would hold the money in an account, and then you would spend it on your budget items, like whatever they are, the honoraria, the equipment. If it was a large grant and it did include a stipend or salary for you, then Drexel would pay you in the same way as they pay you maybe as an RA or a GA currently. And so when Drexel pays you, of course, you're taxed on your wages again. So I'm not quite sure why that situation was different, but this, generally speaking, you being a representative of Drexel doing the research, Drexel signing off on everything and agreeing that it can be done, Drexel gets the money, so it never directly is payment to you. You just have control of how to spend it.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Looks like we have a question from Lisa B.
Yes, thanks, Joe. I'm wondering, has there ever been a time when there's been like a cross-disciplinary type of funding? Like, say I know I'm looking to do something that is nursing related, but also very arts related. Do I stay in my nursing lane? Do I try to span out, like, you know, spread my wings and see where I can get money?
Never stay in your lane.
Okay.
So if you can identify a source that you think has potential overlap with your project, I would say go ahead and investigate that further. So if they have a point of contact and you're allowed to check in with them before submission, that'd be a great question for them. You know, my background is in nursing, but this project really is arts related. Is it something you guys are interested in? And potentially they can give you direction. I don't know, do you have, so maybe you have people from the arts world on your committee?
I actually have someone from Arts Philadelphia. She's the CEO and founder of the, it's a nonprofit.
Maybe she has some resources she's familiar with?
She may, yes. I'm just in the kind of that infancy of the whole committee process.
Okay. Yeah, and definitely that's something to keep in mind. It sounds like you are, Lisa, that you have people on your committee who can speak to and provide expertise on all of the aspects of your dissertation. So that sounds great. So certainly turn over every stone and figure out if it's a fit and go for it.
And then next question is from Laura Bear.
Hey, Claire. Thank you. This was really helpful. So timing, like you said, is a thing. And obviously I'm like not there yet, but when I get there, I'm sure this depends on the mechanism, but how long can you sit on the funds if you're lucky enough to be funded? How long do you usually actually have to complete the dissertation project? Or is there a way that they can revoke it from you, or how does that work?
So typically these dissertation specific type awards, the funds are available for a year. So let's say, I'd use that example where the proposal is due in January, the notification is in April. So you get your funds to spend, say, May 1st, and then they'll give you 12 months. So by May 1st, the following year, you would have to have spent all your funds. So if you're planning for a 6-month-long data collection, but it's not going to start until September, that would be fine. So it doesn't matter when you spend it within your year, as long as it's gone before the end of the year. And also, depending on the source, they may or may not allow you to keep it for a little longer if you petition them and say, you know, my data collections were delayed. I plan to be finished 3 months after the original deadline. Would you allow me to keep the funds for an extra 3 months? And they may or may not, depending on their own internal rules. That's not something to rely on. That's kind of something to fall back on. But yeah, once they give you the money, they're not really checking on that until the 1 year later time point when they're going to look to see if it's been spent.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Okay. So if we don't have any more questions, I think we can wrap it up for today. Thanks everyone for attending. Hope you found it useful. If you have any follow-up questions later, feel free.
That was terrific.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us.